But it brings us to the opportunity that lies and the challenge behind it, which is this place was not built for diverse learners. It wasn't built for the students who are here. And so we need to think about what's happening in the classroom. Our students of color are reporting things in the classroom as well as outside of the classroom in terms of their spiritual formation experiences, their chapel experiences, campus activities and organizations. There are systems that simply put barriers in place for our students of color, and they are not having the APU experience that our white students are having. And that's the main thing I want you to understand today, is that there is a different experience among our students. And that should break our hearts, because that's not who we are, that's not what we want. And so how do we create the kind of learning environment that brings all of our students to life? Some of our other challenges and opportunities that grow out of that is that the sense of community here is not what we see at other Christian universities. Particularly among our students of color, but even our white students do express a lower level of a sense of community than students at other Council for Christian Colleges and Universities that have participated in these same surveys. We've talked about the financial struggles, not just as an institution, but that our students face. We are addressing the academic advising issue, but it was very clear that many students were not getting the kind of advising that helped them figure out what to do with their lives and how to find a career path, but also the kind of person they wanted to become and how they could grow into that in their work with us. And so we're addressing some of these issues, and Ted Zito will talk about that a little bit later. We also discovered that we don't trust our own data. And that because we may not trust it, and what this comes from is because we're so siloed. So there's multiple systems. And I talked to a lot of offices that said, well, I'm not sure the university data is right, so we create our own database, right? And so you've got all these kind of shadow databases, and I think it's primarily the root to that difficulty is that we've been siloed. We have kind of homegrown and created some different systems. But the big downside to that, or the consequence of that, is if you don't trust the data, then you don't use data to make decisions. So then how are we making decisions? Well, it's on perception, or it's the stories we hear, the anecdotes, or if we are in the right relationships with people, we're making decisions that way. And so we've got to be taking a look at how we make decisions and how we collect data that we can trust to make those decisions. I also heard a lot about a lack of communication. And again, this goes back to the silos, is that within particular schools or offices, there was relatively good communication, but that when you've got everybody doing kind of their own thing a little bit differently than everyone else, there's not a sense of, but where's the university going? And what are we doing collectively? And what's happening across the entire university? From the student perspective, they were getting bombarded by so many different offices' communication that wasn't coherent to them and was really confusing, particularly when they had no background in higher education. They had no clue what all the different emails and communications coming to them were about. And then it's no surprise, of course, that particularly after this challenging year, that faculty and staff morale. I grew up in the South, and there's a saying in the South, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And I've adapted that for higher education. If faculty ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, right? And so for us as faculty, when we are not necessarily thriving, when we are feeling more challenged than usual, then that makes it difficult for our students to thrive. But I loved seeing that it did not come out in the teaching evaluations, that we still were able to stay strong during a very challenging year. So as we think about what's under our control as faculty, there are a couple of areas that I want to highlight. And on this screen, on this graph, the green is where the average CCCU, so we're comparing ourselves in this instance because this last fall, the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities used the Thriving Quotient across their member institutions. So we collected a lot of data and we compared APU at both the grad and undergrad level to other data in the CCCU. The red is our students of color and the blue are our white students. So what we see is that the biggest gap between our white students and all of these are significantly different, by the way, statistically. And what we see is the biggest gap between our white students and our students of color is the quality of interaction that they're having with faculty. When they interact with us, they may not always experience that as a positive interaction. So in national data, we know, for instance, that Black students are most likely to interact with faculty, but they experience the least benefit from that. So those are not positive interactions, right? So when we look at that, thinking about what kind of interactions are we having, do we know the kinds of interactions that really bring out the best in our students? And then across the CCCU, we saw that a sensitivity to the needs of diverse learners was where all of us are weaker than some other areas, but you'll see that was also where there was a gap. So these are areas that are under our control as faculty. How often we interact with students, whether that's rewarding and positive, whether they pick up from us that we are listening and we're sensitive to what they may need, that we are bringing diverse perspectives in our curriculum, but also encouraging that in the classroom. When we look at institutions that do make a difference in student success, they have this in common, and that is they take a very proactive approach. So they're thinking ahead. They're thinking ahead to the projections. They do prevention, not crisis intervention. And I think we've been in reactive mode for a little too long, but we're beginning to now get into proactive mode that says, let's be intentional. Let's think about who our students are and will be and what the future will hold, and how do we design the structures to help them succeed.